but we'll be talking about startups and opportunities for industry application of your technologies today. We heard from Devesh on Wednesday. So again, this is part of the Bezos Center for Sustainable Protein. I'm in charge of the innovation and commercialization aims as part of the center, and I'll be coordinating with the team of Innovation and Commercialization Committee to hold events like this as we go throughout the next year, as well as follow-on years in the center. The goal for today is to just kind of give you a brief overview and intro to startup companies, to some of the services that are available at NC State to help get your company off the ground, as well as some educational content just on what is a startup, what is a large company, how are they different, why would you choose to do a startup company versus licensing somewhere. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that are available at some of the partner institutions and some opportunities that exist within the center, but also broadly at NC State and the region. So today we're going to go through process flow. We'll go through our startup services I mentioned, I-Core introduction, boost funds, which are really interesting option for you as you move your technologies forward. Go through ORCA, commercialization councils, the Wolfpack Investor Network. Talk about a little bit of that, kind of come back to that question that we introduced on Wednesday about licensing to a large company versus a startup company. What's the pros and cons of that? And then survey link. So I updated the calendar invite. Hopefully you all saw the update to that. It's at the very top. I'll share the link out once we share the slides and the recording early next week, most likely. So we're doing a professional recording of this in addition to the Zoom so that people who aren't able to attend today can view this after the fact. I'll make both recordings available online as soon as we have them available, and I'll share the survey link again there as well. So please let me know if you can't access it. I did test it this morning, so I think it works, but if it doesn't, just let me know and I'll shoot you the link in the email. They can't, or?
On the computer.
Oh, that's fine. It's just supposed to be on me. Yeah, we're sharing the whole screen. All right, so what is a startup company? In general, it's a high growth, unique value proposition company. So it's doing something that nobody's ever done before. That's kind of the bare bones explanation. But in the context of research-based startup companies, what we're focusing on are companies that are trying to solve an unmet need. So something that hasn't been properly solved yet. There's a lot of companies out there, a lot of different ways to build a business. What we're talking about when we say startup company is somebody who's focused on a problem that hasn't been properly solved. Failure does not diminish the experience. I have 2 failed startups under my belt, and I'm still kicking. So the whole idea behind the startup process is that, the end result is hopefully to get your product to market, have impact on society, change the way people are doing what you're working in. But if you can't get there, you're still going to learn. If you can't get all the way to that end goal, you're still going to learn an immense amount of information and skill sets that are going to be applicable to you throughout your career. It's gotten me into this field that I'm in today, solely because I did a startup company about 12 years ago. That kind of took me down this path. And so I think, not to say you're going to get into tech transfer or working with startup companies every day, but I think you can definitely apply a lot of the skills that you might learn through a startup process to your research and to your work as you move forward. Typically takes more time, resources, and pivots than you can plan for. We always tell people that you typically want to budget out how much money you need for whatever you're trying to do and then double it. Because there's going to be a lot of things that don't work. Things are going to be delayed. You may end up having a pandemic pop up out of nowhere, causing supply chain issues and all sorts of fun stuff. So there's always going to be things outside of your control. So planning for things is always important. What is a startup company? Here's some listed down at the bottom. These are all NC State affiliated startups or based on NC State research. Startup is a company that's in search of their business model that works. They don't know. They're all pitching an idea about what their business model will be, but they aren't doing an existing business. So think about something that's more of a service business or real estate or a restaurant or dry cleaners. There's an existing business model. If you do these things, theoretically, people will pay you for that service or product. In most cases, for the startups we're working with, there's questions on all parts of that. We don't know if anybody's going to use this yet. We think they might, based on the problems we're trying to solve, but it's a big open-ended question that we have to solve that. And that's really the work of the startup, is identifying that unmet need and solving that in a unique way. An established large company is usually trying to return the greatest value to their shareholders. So if you look at a Fortune 500 company, somebody that's listed on the stock market, they're not typically there to change the way they're doing their business every day. They are there to hopefully provide a nice dividend and a stock price increase to their shareholders year over year. So it's a very different kind of mindset, different kind of goals for a large company versus an early stage startup company. One goal for a startup company could be to be acquired by one of those larger companies. So on here we have Novus. They just recently acquired BRI International, which was a spin-out startup out of NC State. So they saw value in BRA's technology, their products, and their people, and they acquired that company. It was smarter for them to do that than to spend years and a lot of money to develop those products. It makes sense just to acquire those, and I'll give some more examples of those later in the presentation. What is not a startup? So I mentioned fully defined business models, restaurants, service businesses, retails. There's nothing wrong with those businesses, but when we say startup, we're not talking about these types of companies. So you won't see many of these on something like Shark Tank. You won't see many of these pitch at one of our venture days or an event in the RTP area focused on startup formation, because you can go to a bank and you could get a loan for a restaurant, theoretically, or for a retail store, because it's understood how you're going to make money. In most cases with a startup, you don't have that option. If you went to a bank to ask for a loan, you would be pitching something that theoretically doesn't really exist yet. Your product category is new, or it's growing and it hasn't been fully defined. Generally very interested in startup companies. So not really the restaurant, service, and retail, but the large companies are really interested. So the companies that were startups 10, 20 years ago, they are always looking for new innovation, and a lot of times it makes sense for them to acquire that innovation through a startup company acquisition. So some examples of companies that acquire technologies all the time: Apple, Cargill, Bayer, a lot of these Fortune 500 companies. It makes sense financially for them to go find a company that's already done all the de-risking, done all the hard work of getting the product to market, and then snapping them up. Another way to think about this when we look at how and why startups exist at an NC State or a research university in general is looking at the technology readiness levels. So if you look at this at TRL 0, that's essentially kind of where we are today, potentially, with your research teams within the Bezos Center. We're coming up with ideas. We have problems. We're trying to solve them with unique solutions. Then you're going to go off and do your research. And all the way down here at TRL 9, that's when you're on the market with a product that's actually being sold to solve that process. Well, academics are really good at the first 4 levels there, up to TRL level 3. Of getting to the point where you have that applied research proof of concept. And that's where research funding usually starts to dry up. You may end up getting some applied funding through NSF or USDA or NIH to get to that point. But that's usually the point where they're not willing to go beyond there. They want to see other people fund that development work to get the product to market. Historically, large corporates, the Apples, the Cargills, the Bayers of the world, would come in and start to license those technologies out at that applied research phase. So you'd see research parks, maybe not Apple and Cargill and Bayer, but think of Bell Labs, IBM, Xerox, these companies that would have huge office parks, and they would hire a ton of R&D engineers. They would license technologies in, they would develop them, work on them for 5, 10, 15 years, however long it took to get to market, and then launch those products. What they found was that didn't really work. It was not sustainable. It cost a lot of money. It was a huge drag on their bottom line, on their balance sheet. And so they started to move further upstream. So they looked at products that essentially were already on the market and things that are mostly proven, getting through all the regulatory before they're really willing to look at you or license that technology in. The hard part is that in probably like the late 90s to early 2000s, the academic research funding did not span that gap. The funders, the NSFs, the NIHs, the federal agencies weren't willing to make the leap to help fund that directly through the universities. So that's where startup companies have started to fill that gap. And so that's where we focus a lot of our efforts, is to say, our intention is not for every company to grow to be $1 billion business on its own or to IPO on the stock market. Some will, and some potentially could go all the way to market with a product. Many of ours have out of NC State. But a lot of companies are just in the business of trying to move up essentially along this TRL path to get themselves to be valuable enough to de-risk the technology and the product enough so that one of those large players will come in and acquire you or partner with you and take it all the way. So when we look at things in terms of the enjoyment or excitement level with the startup process, it is definitely a roller coaster. Many of you who've been through it can understand that. If you haven't been through it before, it's a whole bunch of fun getting it off the ground, going through all the programs, getting the company incorporated. Usually happens about right here with the initial enthusiasm. And then reality sets in that, oh, we have to do a lot of work. There's a lot more things to do that were outside of what we did in the lab. And that's where a lot of what we do within New Ventures and Investments and ORC focus our efforts, is helping to assist to get you through essentially this trough of disillusionment to get to the point where you're on your way up. There can be some rough times where you will get turned down for meetings, not get funded from investors, not get funded from grants, but we have a lot of support structure here at NC State and within the Triangle that can help with addressing a lot of those issues and hopefully getting you over that gap as soon as possible so you're on your way to success with building your products and building your team. So we have this comprehensive venture development process that we've put together at NC State. Many of the partner institutions that we're working with have similar structures or processes in place to help companies get off the ground. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just to mention that you can definitely look this up after the fact with the shared slides or the recording, but there's basically no part of the process that we don't have something to help you with. We really take a comprehensive approach all the way from that first meeting where faculty either comes to our office or we go to their lab and say, tell me what you want to do. What is your goal? What are you trying to do? And understand their ambitions and where you want to take things, all the way down to raising that Series A seed round funding of a couple $1 million, bringing in full-time management. That's usually kind of the handoff point from our team to other people, is that we'll work with you all the way through that. We can definitely assist you after the fact as well, but once you have full-time employees working with your startup, it really is their role and responsibility to take on the effort of helping to move this forward. But we've got lots of opportunities here. We've got a lot of funding and other sources of support throughout the process. And we've been rated pretty well at doing this as well. I think it was 2 years ago, we were ranked by the Heartland Forward group as the #2 tech transfer office when rated against all the public schools in the U.S. Here's some more stats. Just one of the interesting things that I feel like we have at NC State is that we have the #1 cumulative startups operational. So #1 in the country for auto rankings for universities without a medical school of startups that are still in existence and going forward. We also have launched over 230 startups out of NC State since the probably mid-'80s when things were started to be tracked, and a huge amount of research and products on the market. One of our programs that we are very proud of and provide a great opportunity for anybody in the Bezos Center who's working with an NC State researcher, which is pretty much everybody, I believe. The Chancellor's Innovation Fund is a great stepping stone from the work you're doing with the Bezos Center to doing some proof of concept work based on where you're going to take this technology. The call is open right now, so I don't know if you're ready this year, but we have the call usually open middle of September to middle of October each year. The process goes through, I think, early March, and then that funding is available the following fiscal year. It's designed as $50,000 for proof of concept and $46,000 for entrepreneurial training. So we have funding from the 2NDF group, Bill Spruill's family office, to help accelerate our startup companies that are coming through the CIF program. We've funded some of the stats here, a ton of projects over the past 10 years, and seen some really big successes come out of it. Another program that I'll mention here is I-Core. This is something that we will most likely be either doing a special cohort or strongly encouraging research groups that are going through the Bezos Center to participate in. It is a wonderful way for a short period of time to dig in deep into your specific industry, to understand what are the needs, what are the problems facing the people that you're potentially going to be working with as customers. We ask you to go do 20 interviews over about 5 weeks and report back basically on what are the issues, the problems that they're facing, and does that align with what you had assumed going in. Sometimes there's a good alignment there and you're off to the races and you can go on to solve their problem and hopefully develop a good solution. But we do this as early as possible so that you can understand at the front end, am I actually solving a problem they care about? Or is this something they never mentioned during the meetings, during our discussions, and we're going to have to spend millions of dollars in marketing to convince them that they have a problem that we're going to solve? We want to find the customers that have that hair on fire problem that we don't have to go out there and search and convince them. We want to work with the people who are already trying to solve it and sell them that product once we're ready to get to that point. We run this program 3 times a year. We are running one in November, so if anybody's already ready, we're still taking applications. The link's here, I think. I included it somewhere, but there it is. The link is there to sign up if you're at all interested in I-Core. I teach along with Zach Williams in our office. The cohort is a lot of fun. It's only about 2 or 3 hour commitment each week, and then interviews on top of that. But it's a great way to get off the ground and really dive into what the commercialization pathways might be. And it is open to anybody. We don't restrict this to NC State researchers. So if you're one of the partner institutions or even outside of that, we have community teams apply and go through. The key is you need to have some technology behind it. So it can't just be an idea. Theoretically, you've done a little bit of work to prove that your innovation can move forward. Why do RRC startups slow down? So we looked at a lot of different ways to help support this. Some of them have limited funding available. Some of them lose momentum trying to go for that first funding round. They go through our programs, they go through I-Core, and they form the company, and then they are just waiting for that first thing to hit. There's no greater motivation than applying for something. That's kind of the currency of academics is application dates and publications and all the things like that. So we've put together programs called Boost Funds that's going to be available to Bezos Center researchers that is essentially focused on de-risking the most unknown portion of your business model canvas. And you may say, what is a business model canvas? Well, it's basically taking a business plan, condensing it down into 9 different parts, and it's the core kind of focus area of I-Core is answering, in our version, the first 2 parts of that. But if there's another component of that you'd like to dig deep into, whether it's funding, partnerships, channels, understanding how to pitch your company, grant funding, there's a lot of different avenues we can go with Boost Funds. But the idea is to provide actionable consulting dollars, so working with outside folks, whether they're a standalone consultancy or a potential entrepreneur that would maybe come in and help you launch a startup company, to go work on a project for 3 or 4 months, and we'll pay for them to do that through this Boost Fund operation. So here's some of the existing things that would fall under that category. About $10,000 maximum per project, kind of reviewed ad hoc as we go through, and we do have specific funding available for this through the Bezos Center. Another group that we've coordinated through ORC is called ORCA, so the ORC Advisors Network, and we're affectionately calling it ORCA because it is the whale is the wolf of the sea, and it also just works with our acronym, so we're real happy about that. But the idea there is that it's a group of really smart, experienced people who are interested in giving back. We've recruited over 70 people to this network thus far over the past 2 years, and the goal is to hopefully engage them when it's necessary to leverage their experience. Many of them have had multiple exits, they've worked in different startup companies, they've had a really good track record of success, and now they want to help NC State startups. So we can pair them one-on-one so that you're going to be working with them on a consistent basis. We also hold these things called Think and Do meetings that are basically targeted startup-focused events where a startup raises their hand and said, we're trying to hire a CEO. How do we go about doing that? We have a bunch of academics, we've gotten some grant funding, now we're trying to hire a management team. What are the tips and tricks on that, and how do we strategize that? Or we've got a research project that we've been using for a long time, now we're transitioning to selling it as a software product. How do we actually go through that process? What are the things to think about? So we do those about twice a year, focused on different startups based on the need, and it's been, I think, a pretty good, successful way to engage with this group. The ORCA members can also come in and serve as mentor. If you go to the iCore website, there is an explanation of kind of an ideal team. Part of that is a mentor, and we can pull from this group to provide those mentors. Councils. So this is another kind of support group that's going to be forming as part of the Bezos Center. We piloted this with Steve Markham and the Plant Sciences Initiative and their Seed to Grow program. Right now, I think we have about 12 members as part of the Commercialization Council, and myself, Brian Eller from our office serve on that. Steve Markham and a few other administrators from PSI and other university folks. And then we have investors. So I think we have 3 venture capital investors and 2 experienced entrepreneurs that are, and I think we just added a 3rd to the council. And so the idea is to provide funding and management advice from the very beginning. So you are going through the Bezos Center, you've come up with some intellectual property, now you're thinking about potentially doing a startup company. We can put smart people around you and give hopefully that actionable advice on a consistent basis. So we'll be forming that. We're meeting with people this fall, and we'll be forming that in the spring, so stay tuned about that. Who should commercialize the invention? So there's definitely perspectives on how this works and why you would want to go to one route versus another. When you think about a large company, they have certain skill sets that are different than what a startup company is usually good at. They're really good at scaling a product and manufacturing. They most likely already have a facility built. They don't need to go to a field somewhere, select a site, spend hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a facility to do what you're trying to do. Most likely you could modify or adapt to what your process is to fit into their structure already. They're not as great at R&D. A lot of the R&D teams at large companies have been cut back, or they're very much a lot smaller than they used to be 20, 30 years ago. And the reason for that is just they weren't as efficient at getting the products through their process as a startup company would be. They also have existing sales, distribution, support as part of their business. So they have a comprehensive approach to selling a product, where it's not one person who's got 5 different jobs like it might be in a startup company. Startup companies, on the other hand, most likely developed the tech themselves. They innovated it. They came up with it. So they know what it can and can't do. They can pivot when needed, which will most likely happen. One of the most common things that we see with startup companies coming out of a research university, whatever the invention was, whatever the IP was, may or may not actually be used when the product's on the market. And not to say that's because the IP was bad, it's just it is often the case where things have to change, or you have to switch to a different process, or you've come up with new ways to solve that problem while in that process of getting to market. And so that's why one of the main things that we do with our IP licensing group is try to get some amount of equity in the startup in addition to any royalty off of that IP, is so that we can capture some value if you end up not really using the intellectual property once you're at the sales process. Startup companies are also scrappy and hungry. They have no revenue. So the only way that they show success and progress is by hitting their milestones and getting more investment. And that means that you have to be very efficient with your funding and move very quickly. Skill sets don't usually translate to a cubicle. Oftentimes the startup team, the founding team, may stick around for a few years. They may be the ones doing all of the work in the first 3 to 5 years of the startup company. But once you're a team of 50, 100, 200, 500 employees, that is a very different job than what was the case when you were starting the company. It was just a few of you in a lab tinkering with stuff. You're most likely managing people, large groups of people, raising different kinds of money. So it's a very different skill set needed once you get to that stage. Who should commercialize the technology? The goal is for the innovation to get to market, to have impact. That's why we're doing this. We're not just doing this to start businesses. We're hopefully impacting the field that you're in and making sustainable protein a viable option for people as they move forward throughout their lives and our needs for global hunger across the world. Listening to the Bezos Earth Fund team talk about that at the kickoff, it was impactful to say that we have big goals we need to reach. So that's kind of the end result. That's what we're trying to shoot for. How do we get there? Startups can be part of that picture, but they don't have to be the only way to get there. Startup typically de-risk the technology, and a large company will typically come in and acquire you at a certain stage. It is very dependent on the field, on the industry, when that occurs. There are usually specific milestones or value inflection points. This is another way people phrase it. Of once you get to this stage, then you're a good fit for somebody to come and buy you. Sometimes that's a product on the market. Sometimes it's a regulatory approval or being able to show proof of concept at a certain scale. So getting beyond the benchtop, maybe in a pilot facility or at a full commercial scale, whatever makes sense for what you're trying to do. And in most cases, it's usually cheaper for a large company to come in and buy a startup than spend a decade trying to compete and out-innovate. It's just usually a more efficient use of capital to go ahead and pay for a company for tens of millions or billions of dollars than to spend that time hiring people to go solve that same problem. So who should commercialize the tech? Authentech. I don't know if anybody's online, if anybody wants to throw in chat. Anybody remember what that company had developed? Anybody? You can unmute and yell it. I don't care. Been talking for a while. Crickets. Well, I'm sure you guys have heard of Waze or use Waze frequently. It was a startup at one point. Oculus, the VR headsets, Quest, that was also a startup company back in the day. So Apple acquired Authentech to get the Touch ID sensor on the iPhone. So it's a technology, one of the, I think he's affiliated with NC State. Scott Moody, his company, had developed down in Florida at the time, but they developed a biometric sensor. I think Motorola had used it originally, but they bought the company Authentech so that they could get the fast fingerprint reader technology from them to integrate into, I think it was the iPhone 5 was the first one with that Touch ID sensor. Waze, Google Maps already had a mapping service. Waze provided the crowdsourced information network. So you could report where police were, where accidents were. Seemingly, I don't know if it's that much more valuable now than it was 5-10 years ago, but often Waze would give you better directions or send you through random neighborhoods to get around traffic because they were able to see before the traditional mapping services could. Oculus developed a lot of the first generation VR headsets that have made waves across the industries, and Meta acquired them a few years ago to basically bring that whole technology space in. Before buying Oculus, Meta was Facebook, and they had Facebook and Instagram. Now they're a hardware company. They're developing things with Ray-Ban, doing more optics related things all the time, and distributing kind of their purview solely based on buying a startup company. So that's sometimes the case where a large company may not really be in your space yet, but they want to get in. One of the best ways to do that, buy a company that's already doing that work or selling products in that space. You click back to the, Miranda, can you click back to the PowerPoint? Just click anywhere on the screen. Yeah, so the Wolfpack Investor Network I'll go through quickly, and then I'll open the floor to questions. I think there's not too much more after this. It's a group that's been around since 2017. It was formed alongside Duke's Angel Network, which is now called Duke Capital Partners, and the Carolina Angel Network is part of the Triangle Venture Alliance. We formed it here at NC State to focus on alumni, staff, student, and research-based startup companies out of NC State to fund those companies with people that are affiliated with the university. So we have investors who are accredited investors, so meet certain thresholds of income and net worth, that want to put their personal money into startup companies affiliated with NC State. We've been funding probably about 5 to 8 a year across all different industries, not just food or sustainable technology like what might come out of the Bezos Center. But I know that they're very interested, and I think our goal is to hopefully have a joint event or an educational event for the WIN network sometime in the spring, focused on the Bezos Center to introduce this opportunity and be on the lookout for companies that would be a great fit for this. So around since 2017, about $25 million total has been invested, 35 portfolio companies, over 600 jobs created. We've had some really good exits out of the network as well, and they're a group that sits underneath the New Ventures and Investments team. So I work directly with Abby Phillips, their director, on a consistent basis to help provide new companies to pitch in front of the network, and also to coordinate interactions with the New Ventures team and things like Bezos as we move forward. I know Duke has this group. There are other angel groups and investors in the area, and we, as part of the New Ventures and Investments team, have good relationships with many different investors, both locally and nationally, who may be a fit for investing in companies that are coming out of the Bezos Center. So we do have resources available at all the partner institutions. So NC State's listed there. Kind of the best way to go about finding most of the information is just go to the ORC website at the high level, and then you can dig in based on where you're interested. You can find information about filing IP and working with the licensing team that Devesh talked about on Wednesday, as well as the startups support through New Ventures and all of the educational content and the funding through Chancellor's Innovation Fund and things like that. Duke has a very comprehensive program over there with the Office of Technology Commercialization, OTC. We work very closely with their team on a number of events and other programs that we run. I know their team pretty well, and I know that they do a great job. NCA&T also provides support. Some of the support from A&T and Pembroke focus on just general entrepreneurship, but I think a lot of the training and support and mentoring is available through those organizations as well. And I think as part of the Bezos Center and being collaborators on most of the projects that you'll be working on, I think most, if not all, of the researchers within the center will qualify for most of NC State resources, just based on that collaboration and having IP that'll be most likely jointly owned and things like that. So I'll just leave this up. These are just some of the companies and some of the programs that we've launched over the years. So very comprehensive. We start about 15 to 20 startup companies a year out of NC State. Been very successful in commercializing technology, funding startup companies, and hopefully getting products to market. But happy to answer any of your questions. My contact information is here at the end, and I'll leave this up while I'll answer some questions. So does anybody have any burning questions you'd like to ask? We can definitely have an open discussion with, I don't know how many people, there's like a few people on the call.